What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today I am on the rooftop of the Activa Club in Almeria in Spain. It's over 30 degrees, it is hot up here on the roof, but anyway, we soldier on. Today I want to show you guys one of my favorite moves for really opening up the back space in your hips. Okay, so think of all that posterior hip capsule, posterior pelvis, all that glute tissue in the back of your hip. How to really find a new way of accessing that space, and also combining that in a really nice way with some adductor strengthening, okay? Because if you imagine how we move into our hip, into a hinge position, if we want to drive some really nice internal rotation and start driving that movement of the pelvis on top of the femur, then we need to have something to help pull us in. Because if we're sitting back into our glute tissue, that's all well and good, okay? We're lengthening into that glute tissue like a slingshot, or imagine you bounce on a trampoline, you lengthen into that tissue. But what needs to happen on the other side of that joint, of that hip joint, is we need to contract something. Something needs to be shortening. And in the case generally of accessing that internally rotated position of the pelvis moving on top of your femur, as happens in running and in walking, then we need to be able to get our adductors to start to do that job. And an issue that most people face, particularly if they have groin issues, it's generally actually because they can't use their adductors. They can't use them in that shortened position to pull themselves into their hip. So a solution to a lot of groin issues is to actually help you find some internal rotation space in your hip. And one of my favorite ways to do that is using a move called a lateral hinge. Okay, this is somewhat similar to a regular kickstand hinge or a double leg hinge or a RDL type movement. But with this lateral hinge, it really helps you enter into that space in a very different way. Okay, we're coming from a central position where our feet are a little bit wider than hip width, and we're actually turning ourselves into that side and moving into our hip space from, let's say, a more lateral position versus a regular hinge where we actually tend to enter into that space from a more sagittal plane, like a front to back position. But this position of the pelvis being off of that femur, it opens up a little bit more of this externally rotated space, okay? The hip is in more of an externally rotated position, so it gives us more room to get into an internally rotated position from there. And it also allows this real nice movement of the pelvis in over the femur, and it's really going to allow us to get those adductors to do their job and combine that with a loading back into this pelvis here, into the back space of this pelvis. So it's a really underutilized way, but it's one I use with clients a lot, and it's one that is really central to our hip mobility program in various stages, and we include various progressions and variations as you move through that program. But this is a really central one, and it works very well for most people, because if you're someone who's struggling to improve hip internal rotation, or you're struggling with groin issues, then this is a really nice step back from something like a kickstand hinge or something that's a little bit more sagittal plane based. Now we're incorporating a little bit more of that frontal plane. We've got some transverse plane as well as our sagittal. So it's a much nicer, it's a much more realistic movement of what would happen at the hip as you walk and run. So I'm gonna show you guys exactly how you can get set up for this exercise and some of the key points to focus on, some of the things that you want to avoid that kind of most people make mistakes on. And I want you to try it for yourself, okay? Because I think if you're struggling with restrictions in glutes, restrictions at your hip, some groin issues, this is going to be a game changer for you. So check out this, let's get into it and give this a try for yourself. Okay, for our contralateral lateral lunges, there's two options we can use here. We can use a contralateral load or just a contralateral reach, okay? Either way, I'm going to show you with the reach first, and our setup is as follows. We're going to set our feet just a little bit wider than hip width, okay? We don't need to be super wide here. We're going to go into like this lateral hinge, okay? But we just want them to be a little wider than hip width, and we want our feet on both sides pointing straight ahead in front, okay? From here, what we're essentially trying to do is we're trying to sit down into one hip and trying to slightly turn our pelvis into this side, get our body weight over this side and sit ourselves back into this hip so we can load up this tissue in the back side of our hip. So a couple of key things we need to keep in mind for this. are set up, feet wider than hip width, and toes pointing straight ahead on both sides. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to think of, almost imagine slightly pushing off of this leg, okay? It's just a little push, and I want you to pay attention to the inside edge, so the ball of your big toe, the inside edge of your heel, prioritizing the push through that arch of the foot, okay? Now, I don't want you to roll the foot and lose contact with this outside edge. We're keeping the ball of the fifth toe, or that small toe, and that outside edge of the foot, that stays in contact with the ground all the time. But we are just prioritizing or biasing, encouraging more of a push from the inside edge of that foot, that inside arch. Okay, so I'm initiating with a little push, and as I do that, feel how your zipper, so imagine my zipper is facing straight to the camera here now. I'm going to push, and imagine my zipper turning slightly towards this working leg as I do so. So I push, and I'm pushing my hip across. What I want to do is shift my weight onto this right side, and again, I want to maintain 3 points of contact on my working leg also. So ball of my big toe, ball of my little toe, my heel, all stay in contact at all times. As I sit across, I give that little push off the inside edge of this foot. My zipper slightly turns. I'm sitting this hip out, and I'm going to reach towards the ball of my big toe with my opposite side hand. And as I sit my hip across, I'm thinking of, can my knee stay tracking over my second toe, okay? And I want to try sit my hip, or my back pocket, I'm trying to sit it out as wide as I can, and also sitting back down into this hip. So imagine you're kind of reaching back to sit into a chair. We're not dropping forward into our knee or into our quad. We really want to sit the hip back and out. So that pocket is going back and out. I'm loading heavy onto this heel here, and then I'm going to push back out, come back to center. Okay, so that little push, turn at the pelvis. I'm really trying to sit this hip as far as I can out, while keeping this knee strong over that second toe or so, and maintaining all points of contact on my working leg. As I shift across, I want to feel that I become heavier on that outside edge of my heel, but again, not losing the ball on my big toe here, okay? A mistake a lot of people will make on this, and what will tend to happen is, on the feet side of things, is when we push, we'll tend to roll in like this. We want to push from that inside arch, but keep solid contact on this foot. And what people will tend to do here is the knee will follow with the hip, and we lose the inside edge. Our foot starts to roll outwards. So both feet are firmly planted, and we're just feeling inside edge here as we push. My zipper turns, I sit my hip back and pocket outwards. I feel heavy on my heel here, the outside heel, but I'm still keeping my first toe down. Last thing is, people will not sit back into this hip enough, okay? So instead of actually trying to sit their hip out and almost sit their hip outside of their foot here, that's the intent, people will just turn in like this. Okay, and now we're just getting rotation through the spine, and we're not actually loading into this hip tissue. So from the side, as I sit across, hip goes back. So think of back pocket, you're trying to rip that back pocket. As you sit across, knee stays tracking, hip travels outside of that knee and that foot, sitting back and out, drive through that heel, feel that tissue contract to push you all the way back to the top, okay? Last mistake people will make is, as they sit across, they'll sit forward in their foot. So see how I sit across and my hip doesn't travel back. This is primarily a hinge. So as I push and sit across, I want to think of sitting that hip and that pocket out and back as much as I can. So I'm getting back with a hinge into that hip, and then I sit down in, loading into this back space, drive through the floor. The loaded version then is with a dumbbell, okay? Just start with something light. You can also use a kettlebell, but start light, maintain the form, and then we can start to increase. So it's the exact same, except now, this time, it's the dumbbell that's reaching for my big toe. I drive through the floor and I come back up. So I'm sitting, same push here, zipper starts to turn. I get that slight activation on the groin or the adductors here, knee stays tracking, sitting back into my hip, trying to sit my pocket as wide as I can and as far back as I can, drive through the heel. I feel that work in the back side of the hip. Repeat on one side, and then we're going to repeat same thing on the opposite side, okay? Repeat all your reps on one side first before switching to the other. All right, guys, so that is it. That is our lateral hinge. And you can do that with body weight just, and incorporate the reach, which works super effectively, or you can add a little bit of load. You need to be the judge of that for yourself. Sometimes if you add more load, it can actually cause form to break down. You maybe extend too much through your lower back, maybe you round too much through your lower back, and maybe you just have a little bit too much load than you can handle right now, so your body doesn't allow you to actually move into the areas you want within that hip. So start and do it with intent, and don't be in a rush to load it, because you can really get into that hip with just your body weight and incorporate in a good solid reach. Okay, progress smartly, progress patiently, and if you want to see how you can actually progress this step by step and integrate it into a program to help you really unlock your hips, then be sure to check out our hip mobility program. The link is in the description below. It's already helped hundreds of people resolve hip issues like groin issues, glute tendinopathy related issues, hip flexor issues, but a huge amount of it stems back to our ability essentially to load into our hip and then get ourselves out. And I've shown you a really key exercise that can help you incorporate all of that. But other than that, guys, that's it for today. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you found this video helpful, let me know in the comments below how it worked for you. Let me know if you need some help and guidance on what load you should use. Drop them all below. I reply to everything there personally. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you down there. And other than that, have a great day. I'm going to get off this roof now before I completely cook myself. But it was a pleasure, and we'll chat soon.